In the early hours of a humid morning in West Africa, 3 different storms were gathering at once. In Guinea-Bissau, 14,000 newborn babies were about to become part of a United States-funded medical study. In Kenya, social media was erupting with claims that genetically modified mosquitoes linked to Bill Gates were being released into neighborhoods. And in Burkina Faso, a young military leader had already made a decision that would send a message far beyond his borders: stop the experiments. At first glance, these stories may seem unrelated. One concerns a hepatitis B vaccine trial. Another involves mosquitoes and biotechnology. The third is about national sovereignty and a government order. But beneath the headlines lies a deeper question that resonates across the African continent and far beyond it: who has the authority to decide what happens to African bodies, especially the bodies of children in Guinea-Bissau? The proposed study would divide newborns into 2 groups. Half would receive a hepatitis B vaccine at birth, as recommended by global health authorities. The other half would receive the same vaccine 6 weeks later. Researchers plan to follow these children for 5 years. Supporters described it as necessary science. Critics called it ethically troubling. The government ultimately suspended the trial pending review. In Kenya, rumors spread that a powerful foundation was releasing modified mosquitoes into the capital. The foundation denied the claim. Yet the outrage revealed something important: trust is fragile. And in Burkina Faso, authorities moved to halt genetically modified mosquito activities altogether, framing the decision as a matter of national control and dignity. If you stay with me, you will see that this is not simply a debate about vaccines or insects. It is a story about history, memory, ethics, and the rising insistence that Africa will no longer be treated as a testing ground for ideas that might never be attempted in Washington, Paris, or Copenhagen. The controversy in Guinea-Bissau did not begin with rumors. It began with a research design. Hepatitis B is a serious viral infection that attacks the liver and can silently damage the body for decades before symptoms appear. In many parts of West Africa, the virus is widespread. In Guinea-Bissau, roughly 1 in 5 people is believed to carry the infection. For newborn babies, the danger is even greater. When infected at birth, a child faces a very high risk of developing chronic disease that may later lead to liver failure or cancer. For this reason, the World Health Organization recommends that infants receive the hepatitis B vaccine immediately after birth, followed by additional doses weeks later. The birth dose is considered critical because it can prevent transmission from mother to child during delivery. The proposed study in Guinea-Bissau sought to compare 2 groups of 14,000 newborns. 7,000 would receive the vaccine at birth, following international recommendations. The remaining 7,000 would receive the same vaccine at 6 weeks of age, which reflected the country's current practice in many areas due to supply limitations. Researchers plan to monitor the children for 5 years, examining overall health outcomes beyond hepatitis infection itself. Supporters of the trial argued that because many infants already received the vaccine at 6 weeks under existing conditions, the study would not deprive children of care they would otherwise receive. Critics saw the matter differently. They argued that once a protective intervention is known to reduce risk at birth, deliberately delaying it for research purposes raises serious ethical questions, especially when the participants are newborns who cannot consent. The reaction was swift. Health experts voiced concern about whether the design respected the principle of minimizing avoidable harm. Public debate intensified. Eventually, authorities in Guinea-Bissau suspended the trial pending further ethical review. The science was not rejected outright, but the message was clear: when the subjects are infants, caution must come before ambition. As the debate over the design of the hepatitis B trial intensified, attention quickly turned to the question of funding and political context. The study was supported by the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, with funding reported at approximately $1.6 million. In ordinary circumstances, such funding might pass without controversy, but timing matters, and politics matters. In recent years, vaccine policy in the United States has become deeply polarized. Public debates over childhood immunization schedules, pandemic mandates, and alleged side effects have divided communities. High-profile political figures have openly questioned established vaccine science. Although global health institutions such as the World Health Organization have repeatedly stated that there is no credible evidence linking vaccines to autism or widespread neurological harm, suspicion has persisted in some political circles. Critics of the Guinea-Bissau trial asked whether the research was purely about improving health outcomes, or whether it might also serve a secondary purpose generating data that could be interpreted in domestic political debates far from West Africa. The study aimed to explore what researchers described as non-specific effects of vaccines, meaning broader health impacts beyond protection against hepatitis B itself. For some observers, that phrasing raised red flags, particularly given earlier controversies surrounding members of the same research network and their claims about other childhood vaccines. To be clear, questioning the design of a study is not the same as rejecting science. Research is essential. But when a trial involves newborn children in a low-income country, funded by a foreign agency, and connected to politically sensitive topics, every detail will be scrutinized. The deeper concern voiced by African health professionals was not simply about one vaccine. It was about power. Who frames the research questions, who controls the data, and who ultimately benefits from the conclusions when politics and public health intersect? Perception can become as powerful as evidence, and in this case, perception was already under strain. While Guinea-Bissau wrestled with a vaccine trial, Kenya found itself in the grip of a different kind of storm. On social media platforms, posts began circulating that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was involved in releasing genetically modified mosquitoes in Nairobi. Some users claimed these insects were designed to replace malaria-carrying mosquitoes, but might instead harm children and older adults. Photos and personal testimonies spread quickly. Feeding anxiety, the foundation issued a clear denial, stating that it does not release mosquitoes, does not operate laboratories that do so, and is not conducting vector control activities in Nairobi. Yet, by the time the statement appeared, the narrative had already taken root in the public imagination. In an era shaped by the coronavirus pandemic, trust in public health initiatives has become fragile. When institutions communicate slowly or in technical language, rumors can travel faster than corrections. Part of the confusion stemmed from a broader global discussion about mosquito control strategies. Some projects involve genetically modified mosquitoes designed to reduce malaria transmission by limiting reproduction or altering traits. Others use sterile insect techniques, in which mosquitoes are sterilized but not genetically modified before release. For many citizens, these distinctions are not obvious. What they see are foreign-funded programs, scientific terminology, and a history that does not always inspire confidence. The outrage in Kenya was therefore not only about insects, it was about agency. People asked whether they had been properly informed, whether consent had been sought, and whether long-term environmental consequences had been fully considered, even if specific allegations proved inaccurate. The emotional response revealed a deeper reality. Across parts of Africa, large-scale biological interventions are now viewed through a lens shaped by past controversies and unequal power dynamics. When communication gaps exist, suspicion fills them. And once suspicion takes hold, it becomes difficult to restore calm through press releases alone. If Kenya exposed the fragility of trust, Burkina Faso demonstrated what it looks like when a government chooses to assert control. In Bobo Dioulasso, Members of a coalition for health sovereignty publicly demanded the immediate suspension of experiments linked to genetically modified mosquitoes under the Target Malaria Project. They argued that the issue was not simply malaria control, but national dignity and long-term biological consequences. Activists questioned whether the release of modified mosquitoes, even for research purposes, could have effects beyond the designated testing zones. Mosquitoes do not respect administrative boundaries. If altered insects travel across regions, then the impact extends beyond any single community that may have given limited consent. For critics, this raised a central concern. Can a small group authorize an environmental intervention that could affect an entire population? Burkina Faso's existing biosafety legislation became part of the debate. Opponents of the project argued that the experiments were not fully aligned with national law governing biotechnology and environmental protection. They called for a moratorium on genetically modified organisms and for a greater emphasis on ecological approaches to disease and agriculture. Under the leadership of Ibrahim Traore, the government ultimately moved to halt activities associated with the project, whether motivated primarily by public pressure, legal interpretation, or broader geopolitical strategy. The decision carried symbolic weight. It signaled that Burkina Faso would not automatically defer to international foundations or research networks, even when those networks presented themselves as partners in public health. For supporters of sovereignty, this was a defining moment. It suggested that African states can exercise the right to say no, even in areas traditionally dominated by foreign funding and expertise. For critics, it risked slowing innovation against malaria, a disease that continues to claim lives each year. Yet the deeper message was unmistakable. In a region long shaped by external influence, Burkina Faso chose to frame biotechnology not only as a scientific question, but as a political one. And that reframing changed the conversation across the continent. Long before the current controversies, history left scars that still shape public perception. In the United States, from 1932 until 1972, hundreds of black men in Tuskegee, Alabama, were enrolled in a study on untreated syphilis, even after penicillin became an effective cure. Many participants were denied treatment so researchers could observe the natural progression of the disease. More than 100 men died. Families suffered. Trust was shattered. Decades later, in 1996, during a meningitis outbreak in northern Nigeria, an experimental antibiotic known as Trovon was administered to children. Questions emerged about consent procedures and regulatory approval. At least 11 children died, and others experienced lasting injuries. Legal battles followed, and the episode deepened skepticism toward Western pharmaceutical companies across the region. These events were not minor footnotes. They became part of collective memory. When public health campaigns later sought to expand polio vaccination in northern Nigeria, resistance grew rapidly. At one point, Nigeria carried the vast majority of global polio cases. Health officials had to rebuild confidence step by step, village by village. This history does not mean that all modern research is unethical, nor does it mean that every foreign-funded initiative hides malicious intent. But it explains why many Africans view new biomedical projects with caution. When people hear about vaccine trials on newborns or the release of modified insects, they do not start from a blank page. They start from memory, for older generations especially. The lesson is simple. Vigilance protects dignity. Once trust is broken, restoring it can take decades. That is why current debates over hepatitis B vaccines in Guinea-Bissau or mosquito projects in East and West Africa resonate so deeply. They touch not only on science, but on unresolved wounds that have never fully healed. At the heart of these controversies lies a fundamental ethical question. What standards should govern medical and biological research involving vulnerable populations? Modern research ethics is built on several core principles. One is respect for persons, meaning individuals must be treated as autonomous agents, and those with limited capacity, such as children, require special protection. Another is beneficence, the obligation to maximize benefits while minimizing potential harm. A third is justice, ensuring that the burdens and benefits of research are distributed fairly. When applied to newborn vaccine trials, these principles become particularly sensitive. Infants cannot consent. Parents rely on experts to act in their child's best interest. If a vaccine is widely recognized as protective when administered at birth, delaying that protection for research purposes raises difficult questions. Even if the delay mirrors current practice in some regions, the ethical bar is higher once the delay becomes part of an experimental design. The same reasoning extends to environmental interventions such as modified mosquitoes. Communities must be informed not only about potential benefits, but also about uncertainties and long-term ecological implications. Consent cannot be symbolic. It must be meaningful and based on clear understanding. A recurring question emerges in many African debates: would this exact study design be implemented in Europe or North America under the same conditions? If the answer is unclear, suspicion grows. The perception that certain experiments are more easily conducted in countries with fewer resources feeds the narrative that Africa is treated as a testing ground. Yet, collaboration is not inherently exploitative. International partnerships have saved millions of lives through vaccination campaigns, malaria prevention, and HIV treatment. The challenge is ensuring that cooperation does not slide into paternalism. True partnership requires transparency, local leadership, and accountability. In the end, ethics is not an obstacle to science. It is the foundation that allows science to serve humanity without repeating the mistakes of the past. When we step back and look at Guinea-Bissau, Kenya, and Burkina-Faso together, a larger pattern begins to emerge. In Guinea-Bissau, authorities chose to suspend a vaccine trial involving 14,000 newborns until ethical concerns could be reviewed. In Kenya, public outrage over alleged mosquito releases revealed how fragile trust has become in the age of social media. In Burkina Faso, the government moved to halt genetically modified mosquito activities altogether, framing the decision as an assertion of sovereignty. These events are not identical, but they share a common thread: the demand for control over health decisions that affect national populations. For decades, African countries have relied on international partnerships to combat infectious diseases. Those partnerships have saved lives. Yet partnership must evolve. It cannot be built on the assumption that funding alone grants authority. Western scientists and institutions often warn that halting innovative research could slow progress against malaria or viral hepatitis. That concern deserves serious consideration. Malaria still kills hundreds of thousands each year. Hepatitis B continues to claim more than 1 million lives globally. Scientific advancement matters, but progress that ignores public consent or historical memory risks undermining itself. The lesson for African governments is not to reject science. It is to strengthen oversight, transparency, and local expertise so that research is conducted on equal terms. The lesson for international donors is equally clear. Credibility cannot be imposed. It must be earned through humility and accountability. Ultimately, this debate is about more than mosquitoes or vaccines. It is about dignity. It is about ensuring that African children are protected not only from disease, but also from decisions made without their community's full voice. If Africa is entering a new era of self-determination, then health sovereignty will be one of its defining tests. And how that test is handled will shape trust for generations to come.